A millionaire on his first date found out the woman was a virgin and said, "Let's take care of that tonight." The virgin woman did not give in to his pressure and calmly challenged him to reconsider his behavior. The real lesson for the millionaire was that intimacy only happens with mutual respect and trust. If this story caught your interest, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and tell us which city you're watching from. Manhattan's skyline glittered like a crown of jewels against the night sky as Blake Sterling gazed out from his penthouse office. At 42, he had accomplished what most men only dreamed of: founder and CEO of Sterling Enterprises, a tech empire valued at billions, with investments spanning from Silicon Valley to Singapore. The Financial Times had recently dubbed him the king of New York's tech scene. But titles meant little to Blake. What mattered was power, the ability to make things happen with a single phone call or the stroke of a pen. "Mr. Sterling, your dinner reservation at Elysium has been confirmed for 8 o'clock, his assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Thank you, Rebecca. Have the Bentley ready by 7:30. Blake straightened his custom Tom Ford tie, his reflection in the floor-to-ceiling windows showing a man at the height of his powers. Angular features, salt and pepper hair perfectly styled, and eyes the cold blue of Arctic ice. He had mastered the art of the deal, and somewhere along the way he had mastered people too. Relationships were transactions, simple exchanges of value. Women, in particular, were predictable. They wanted security, luxury, status. Blake provided these things in exchange for their beauty, their admiration, their temporary company. It was a fair trade, he thought. No one got hurt as long as expectations were clear from the start. Elysium was the most exclusive restaurant in New York City, with a 3-month waiting list for mere mortals. But Blake Sterling wasn't a mere mortal. The maitre d' greeted him personally, escorting him past the envious glances of other diners to his regular table, a secluded corner with a perfect view of both the restaurant and Central Park beyond. "The usual, Mr. Sterling?" "The 2005 Chateau." "Margot?" "Yes, Thomas, and I'll be expecting a guest, Ms. Riley Thompson." "Of course, sir, we'll watch for her arrival." Blake checked his Patek Philippe watch. 7 minutes to 8. Riley would be punctual, she always was, according to his research. Board member of 3 major non-profits, curator at the Metropolitan Museum's Modern Art Wing, and granddaughter of a former U.S. senator, Riley Thompson moved in the same elite circles as Blake, but had somehow never crossed his path until the charity gala last week. She had been standing alone, examining a Rothko painting being auctioned, seemingly oblivious to the social currents swirling around her. While every other woman in the room had at least glanced his way, she hadn't spared him a second look. It was novel, intriguing, a challenge. At exactly 8 o'clock, Thomas appeared with a woman whose presence seemed to quiet the room. Riley Thompson didn't command attention through volume or flashiness. Rather, she drew eyes through her serene self-possession. Her simple black dress spoke of understated wealth, her dark hair falling in soft waves around a face more striking than conventionally beautiful. Blake stood, extending his hand. "Ms. Thompson, thank you for joining me." Her handshake was firm, her smile polite but reserved. "Mr. Sterling, I was curious about your proposition regarding the museum's tech initiative." "Please, call me Blake." He gestured for her to sit. "And I assure you, the museum's future interactive exhibits will benefit greatly from Sterling Enterprises' involvement." The wine was poured, menus presented. Blake studied Riley over the rim of his glass. She was not what he had expected. Most women in her position would be playing the game by now. Subtle flirtation, strategic laughter, the dance of interest and restraint. Riley, however, spoke about museum attendance statistics and demographic outreach with genuine passion. When he steered the conversation toward more personal territory, she skillfully redirected. It was like trying to grasp water. The harder he tried to capture her interest, the more it slipped through his fingers. "You're not impressed by all this, are you?" he finally asked, gesturing to the opulent surroundings, the deferential staff, the rare wine. Riley looked at him directly for the first time that evening, her dark eyes assessing. "Should I be?" It's a lovely restaurant, but I imagine you bring all your business associates here. Not all, he said, leaning forward. Only the special ones. She took a sip of water, unruffled. Mr. Sterling. Blake. Blake, then. I agreed to this dinner to discuss the museum's technology modernization project. If you're interested in supporting that initiative, I'm delighted to continue our conversation. If you had other expectations, for this evening I should clarify that I'm not available in that capacity. Blake felt a flicker of surprise, then amusement. Women didn't typically reject him, certainly not so directly. I assure you, Ms. Thompson, my interest in the museum project is genuine, but I'm also interested in getting to know the brilliant mind behind it. Riley, please, she corrected, and my mind is firmly focused on bringing art accessibility into the 21st century. The rest of me is rather boring, I'm afraid. The rest of dinner proceeded as a subtle chess match. Blake deployed his most effective strategies, compliments delivered with precise timing, stories that normally impressed, subtle displays of his influence. Riley remained pleasant, but unmoved, discussing art and technology with expertise that even Blake had to admire. When dessert arrived, Blake was no closer to breaking through her composed exterior than he had been at the beginning of the meal. It was maddening, exhilarating. He couldn't remember the last time he'd been so genuinely engaged in a conversation. Let me be direct, he said finally, setting down his espresso cup. I want to see you again, not to discuss museum business. Riley studied him, her expression thoughtful. Why? The simple question caught him off guard. Women didn't ask him, why? They said yes, flattered by his attention. Because you're unlike anyone I've met, he said, surprising himself with his honesty. I doubt that's true, she replied. I think you've met plenty of women who weren't immediately dazzled by your wealth or power. You just never noticed them because they weren't playing the game you're accustomed to winning. Blake felt as though she'd slapped him, though her tone remained perfectly pleasant. That's rather presumptuous. Is it? You've spent our entire dinner trying to impress me, Mr. Sterling. You haven't once asked what impresses me. Blake leaned back, reassessing. This was new territory. Fair enough. What does impress you, Riley? She gathered her purse, preparing to leave. Authenticity, vulnerability, the courage to be seen as you truly are, not as what you own or control. She stood. Thank you for dinner. I'll have my assistant follow up regarding the museum project. Blake rose quickly. You're leaving? It's been a long day, she said, offering her hand to shake. Good night, Mr. Sterling. He took her hand, but instead of releasing it, he held it a moment longer. Have dinner with me again tomorrow, not to discuss business. Riley gently but firmly withdrew her hand. I don't think that would be wise. You find me so objectionable? He asked, a hint of his rarely bruised ego showing through. No, she said thoughtfully. I find you so accustomed to getting what you want that you've forgotten how to want something real. With those words, she turned and walked away, leaving Blake Sterling, the man who always closed the deal, standing alone with a strange emptiness, expanding in his chest where satisfaction should have been. He watched her disappear through the restaurant's entrance, then signaled for the check. This wasn't over. Blake Sterling didn't lose. He didn't walk away from challenges, and Riley Thompson had just become the most fascinating challenge of his life. We'll settle this soon, he murmured to himself, signing the bill with a flourish before striding toward the exit, already formulating his next approach. For the first time in years, Blake Sterling found himself unable to focus on the quarterly projections displayed on his office screens. 3 days had passed since the dinner with Riley Thompson, and her words continued to echo in his mind. You've forgotten how to want something real. The museum project contract sat unsigned on his desk, a simple pretext to see her again. He had nearly called her office a dozen times, but stopped himself each time. This wasn't how Blake Sterling operated. Women called him, not the other way around. Rebecca, he pressed the intercom button. Get me everything you can find on Riley Thompson's current projects at the Metropolitan Museum. Right away, Mr. Sterling. An hour later, Blake was reviewing a detailed report. Riley was spearheading an initiative to bring virtual reality experiences to underserved schools, allowing children who might never visit the Met to virtually walk its halls and experience great art. The project needed substantial funding that Sterling Enterprises could easily provide. "Perfect," Blake murmured, picking up his phone. Instead of calling Riley's office, he dialed a different number. "Harrison, Blake Sterling, I need a favor involving the Metropolitan Museum's education outreach program." Riley Thompson's office at the Metropolitan Museum overlooked the Temple of Dender exhibit. The ancient Egyptian structure, transported stone by stone and rebuilt inside a vast glass-enclosed space, always reminded her that preservation and accessibility weren't opposing values. They could coexist beautifully. Her assistant knocked on the open door. "Riley, there's a situation with the VR Education Initiative. The Winters Foundation just pulled their funding." Riley's heart sank. The Winters Foundation had committed to funding half of the $3 million project. Without it, they'd have to scale back dramatically or delay indefinitely. Why? Their commitment was solid last week. They said another priority came up. "I'm sorry." Riley stared out at the temple, mind racing through alternatives. Months of work, dozens of schools already included in the pilot program, all at risk now. Her phone rang. Unknown number. Riley Thompson speaking. "Ms. Thompson, Blake Sterling, I hope I'm not interrupting." Riley closed her eyes briefly. Of course it was him. "Mr. Sterling, what can I do for you?" "I've been thinking about our conversation and you were right. I never asked what matters to you. So I've taken the liberty of learning about your VR education initiative." Riley tensed. How did he already know about the Winters Foundation pulling out? "It's an important project," she said carefully. "I agree, which is why Sterling Enterprises would like to fully fund it. $3 million plus an additional $1 million for expansion to more schools next year." Riley gripped the phone tighter. "That's very generous. May I ask what prompted this sudden interest?" "Let's discuss it over dinner, tonight." There it was, the quid pro quo she'd expected. Riley's jaw tightened. "Mr. Sterling, if this is your way of—" "No strings attached," he interrupted. "The funding is yours regardless. Consider it officially committed. My legal team will send over the paperwork this afternoon. Dinner is just dinner." Riley frowned, unconvinced. "Why would you commit $4 million without expecting anything in return?" There was a pause on the line. "Because I'm curious if I can impress you with something other than my money or power. 8 o'clock, your choice of restaurant." After he hung up, Riley sat motionless, conflicted. Her instinct was to decline, to find another funding source. But $4 million would not only save the program, but expand it beyond her original vision. And beneath her annoyance lurked an uncomfortable truth. She was curious about Blake Sterling. Not the billionaire CEO, but the man who seemed strangely affected by her rejection. Blake arrived at the small Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village precisely at 8. The place was a far cry from Elysium, family-owned, warm, unpretentious. Exactly the kind of establishment he'd never ordinarily visit. Riley was already seated in a corner booth. Her simple white blouse and minimal jewelry were a stark contrast to the designer-clad women he typically dined with. She didn't stand when he approached. "Mr. Sterling." "Blake, please," he said, sliding into the booth. "I see you're testing whether I can survive outside my natural habitat." A slight smile crossed her face. "Something like that." The restaurant owner himself came to take their order, greeting Riley by name and recommending his wife's special risotto. No fawning deference. No recognition of Blake's status. It was oddly refreshing. "How did you find this place?" Blake asked after they'd ordered. "I lived above it when I first moved to New York. Carlo and Maria treated me like family when I knew no one in the city." She studied him. "You orchestrated the Winters Foundation pulling their funding, didn't you?" Blake didn't insult her intelligence by denying it. "I made them a better offer for their charitable giving this year. One that would still benefit education, just differently. Manipulative." "Effective," he countered. "The end result is better for your program. The schools get more resources, and I get to have dinner with you. Everyone wins." Riley shook her head. "Except for my agency in the matter. You created a problem, then positioned yourself as the solution." Blake leaned forward. "Would you have agreed to dinner otherwise?" "No," she admitted, "but that doesn't justify the manipulation." "Then why did you come tonight?" Riley was silent, for a moment sipping her wine. "Curiosity," she finally said. "I wanted to understand why a man who seemingly has everything is so determined to pursue someone who has clearly indicated she's not interested." "Is that what you indicated?" Blake asked, his blue eyes fixing on hers. "Because I sensed something. Different. Resistance, yes. Disinterest, I'm not convinced. You're accustomed to women who want something from you," Riley said. "Your wealth, your status, your connections. I don't want any of those things. So you've categorized me as a challenge, rather than accept that not everyone is impressed by what you offer." Their food arrived, momentarily pausing the conversation. Blake found himself oddly captivated by the simple pleasure Riley took in her first bite of risotto, closing her eyes briefly to savor it. There was something genuine in the gesture that struck him. "You're right," he said. Suddenly, Riley looked up, surprised. "I'm used to transactional relationships," Blake continued. "Clear expectations, mutual benefits, temporal boundaries. They're efficient, uncomplicated. And empty," Riley added softly. Blake's jaw tightened. "Perhaps, but they've suited my life until now." "What changed?" He studied her for a long moment. "I'm not entirely sure, but at dinner the other night, you saw through me in a way no one has bothered to in years. It was unsettling." Riley set down her fork. "I don't know you well enough to see through you, Blake. I just recognize the pattern. Powerful men who collect experiences, and people like others collect art or cars. Always acquiring, never quite connecting. And you're different. The dedicated curator, so absorbed in preserving culture that you've walled yourself off from actually living it." Riley's eyes widened slightly, then narrowed. "That's presumptuous." "Is it? You've spent our entire dinner psychoanalyzing me. You haven't once mentioned anything personal about yourself." A flash of something, recognition perhaps, crossed her face. "Touché." They ate in silence for a moment, the atmosphere charged with unspoken tension. "I was engaged once," Riley finally said, "to a man not unlike you, brilliant, ambitious, accustomed to control. He saw me as an asset, not a partner, the perfect cultured wife to complement his rise in the political world." Blake watched her, saying nothing. "I discovered he was having an affair 2 weeks before the wedding, not because he slipped up, but because he didn't think it mattered. He assumed I'd understand it was separate from our arrangement." Her smile was bitter. "I've been cautious about men's intentions ever since." "I'm sorry," Blake said, surprised to find he meant it. "He was a fool." "He was practical, just like you." Riley took another sip of wine. "Tell me something real about yourself, Blake. Not your accomplishments or possessions, something true." Blake hesitated. Vulnerability wasn't in his repertoire, but something about the quiet restaurant, the woman across from him who refused to be impressed by his usual tactics, made him want to try. "I haven't spoken to my father in 15 years, he said finally. "He was a factory floor manager in Pittsburgh. When I got accepted to Harvard Business School, he told me I was betraying my roots, trying to be something I wasn't. Said I'd forget where I came from." "Did you? Forget?" Blake looked around the simple restaurant, at the families and couples enjoying meals without pretension. "Yes," he admitted, "I think I did." They talked for another 2 hours, the conversation flowing more naturally than either had expected. Riley spoke of her passion for making art accessible to everyone, not just the elite. Blake found himself sharing stories of his early days building his company, the mistakes and fears he normally omitted from his polished origin story. When they finally left the restaurant, the night air was cool against their faces. Blake's driver waited discreetly at the curb. "May I drive you home?" Blake offered. Riley shook her head. "I'm only a few blocks away. I'll walk." "Then I'll walk with you." She looked as though she might refuse, then nodded. They strolled in silence for a moment, the city's energy humming around them. "Thank you for dinner," Blake said finally. "This wasn't what I expected." "What did you expect?" He considered the question. "To charm you. To add you to the collection, as you might say." Riley stopped walking, turning to face him. "And now?" "Now I'm not sure what I want," he admitted, "except to see you again." They had reached a brownstone with a small, well-tended garden out front. Riley climbed the first step, turning to face him. They were eye to eye now. "I need time to think," she said. "This is complicated. Because of who I am. Because of who we both are." Blake stepped closer, close enough to catch the subtle scent of her perfume. "Have dinner with me again. Next week." Riley studied his face, searching for something. Blake wasn't sure if she found it. "I'll think about it," she said finally. He reached for her hand, lifting it slowly to his lips in a gesture that would have seemed affected with anyone else. With Riley, it felt like the only appropriate way to end the evening. "Good night, Riley." "Thompson." She withdrew her hand gently. "Good night, Blake Sterling." As he walked back toward his waiting car, Blake realized with some surprise that for the first time in years, he felt something dangerously close to hope. 2 weeks had passed since their dinner in Greenwich Village, and Blake found himself checking his phone with embarrassing frequency. Riley had neither accepted nor declined his invitation for another dinner. The uncertainty was maddening for a man accustomed to definitive outcomes. "Mr. Sterling, the board is waiting in the conference room," Rebecca reminded him. Blake straightened his tie and assumed the mantle of CEO once more. For the next 3 hours, he was the Blake Sterling everyone expected, decisive, commanding, 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. But beneath his confident exterior, thoughts of Riley Thompson continued to surface at inopportune moments. After the meeting, he retreated to his office and finally surrendered to the impulse he'd been fighting all day. He called her. Riley answered on the 4th ring. "Hello, Blake." Just the sound of her voice caused an inexplicable lightening in his chest. "Riley, I was beginning to think you were avoiding me." "Not avoiding, contemplating." "And what conclusion?" "Have you reached after all this contemplation?" There was a pause. "That I don't trust your interest in me, but I'm drawn to you nonetheless. It's inconvenient." Blake smiled despite himself. "Inconvenient attraction. I'm familiar with the condition." "I'm sure you are," she replied dryly. "The museum is hosting a private viewing tomorrow evening for the new contemporary exhibition. If you're genuinely interested in art beyond its investment potential, you could accompany me." "What time?" 7. Black tie. "And Blake?" "Yes?" "This is a professional event for me, not a date." Blake leaned back in his chair, grinning. "Understood. I'll be the perfect professional companion." "Somehow I doubt that." There was a hint of amusement in her voice. "I have to go. Tomorrow at 7, main entrance." After she hung up, Blake sat staring at his phone. Why did such a small victory feel so significant? He had closed billion-dollar deals with less satisfaction than he felt at the prospect of spending an evening at Riley's side, even in a professional capacity. His intercom buzzed. "Mr. Sterling, Mr. Harrington is here to see you." Blake frowned. Carter Harrington, his oldest friend and the head of Sterling Enterprises' legal department, rarely made unscheduled appearances. "Send him in." Carter strode in, his usual confident demeanor replaced by obvious concern. "Blake, we need to talk about the Meridian acquisition." Blake gestured for him to sit. "What's the problem?" "The paperwork is being finalized this week." "That's just it," Carter said, placing a folder on Blake's desk. "Someone's making a play against us. Wyndham Tech submitted a competing offer this morning, 20% above ours." "What? How did Jordan Wyndham even know we were in talks with Meridian?" Blake flipped through the documents, a cold anger building as he processed the implications. The negotiations were completely confidential. Carter leaned forward. "That's not all. 3 other pending deals we've been working on have suddenly hit unexpected obstacles. Different issues each time, but the pattern is suspicious." Blake's mind raced. This wasn't coincidence. Someone with inside knowledge of Sterling Enterprises' strategy was sabotaging their deals. Who has access to information about all these acquisitions? That's the thing, it's a very short list. Senior board members, your executive team, and, Blake pressed. Carter looked uncomfortable. And your recent companions. Madison Chen was with you during the early stages of 2 of these deals. You mentioned the Meridian acquisition to Alexis Reynolds at that yacht party in March. Blake's jaw tightened. He'd always been careful about business information, but he couldn't deny that he occasionally discussed work with the women he dated. Not specific details, but enough that someone clever might piece things together. You think one of them is feeding information to my competitors? Carter shrugged. I'm just saying we need to consider all possibilities. Your personal life is your business, but my personal choices could be compromising the company, Blake finished, his tone hard. I understand. Launch a full investigation, but keep it quiet. I want to know how this information is leaking. After Carter left, Blake stood at his window, anger mixing with an unfamiliar sense of vulnerability. He had always kept his romantic entanglements separate from his business, but had that separation been an illusion? Had he been played all along? And what about Riley Thompson? Was her sudden willingness to see him again connected to these business setbacks? The thought sent a sharp pain through him that he wasn't prepared for. The Metropolitan Museum of Art was transformed for the evening exhibition preview. Soft lighting illuminated striking contemporary installations, while New York's elite circulated with champagne flutes in hand, more interested in being seen than in seeing the art. Riley stood near the entrance, stunning in a simple, deep blue gown. Her dark hair swept up to reveal the elegant line of her neck. Blake approached, fighting an unfamiliar nervousness. Miss Thompson, he said formally, aware of the colleagues surrounding her. She turned, her professional smile warming slightly when she saw him. Mr. Sterling, thank you for coming. As she introduced him to her colleagues, Blake observed the respect they clearly had for her. This wasn't mere professional courtesy. They genuinely valued her expertise and leadership. I'd love to show you the exhibition, Riley said, after the introductions concluded. The artist has challenged conventional perspectives on urban isolation in fascinating ways. As they moved through the gallery, Blake found himself genuinely engaged by both the artwork and Riley's insightful commentary. She spoke about each piece with passion and knowledge, occasionally challenging his interpretations in ways that made him see the works differently. "For you really love this, don't you?" he asked during a quiet moment. "It's not just a job for you." Riley's expression softened. "Art has been my sanctuary since childhood. My parents traveled constantly for work, diplomatic service. I was raised by nannies in a dozen different countries. Museums were the one constant, spaces where I could feel connected to humanity across time and place. The personal revelation, offered without prompting, felt like a gift." Blake found himself wanting to respond in kind. "My mother took me to the Carnegie Museum in Pittsburgh exactly once," he said. "I was maybe 9. She worked double shifts at the hospital to make ends meet, but she saved for months to take me on my birthday. I remember being more fascinated by the building itself than the art, the grandeur of it, the sense that it belonged to another world entirely." Riley studied him. "And now you've built your own grand structures, created your own world." "I suppose I have," Blake acknowledged, suddenly seeing his empire through new eyes. "Though lately, I've been questioning whether it's the world I truly wanted to create." Their conversation was interrupted by the museum director, announcing the formal commencement of the event. Riley was called away to help present the exhibition, leaving Blake to observe her in her element, poised, knowledgeable, and genuinely passionate about making art accessible to everyone in the room. Later, as the event wound down, Blake found himself in conversation with an older gentleman who turned out to be Riley's mentor and the museum's former director. "Miss Thompson is quite remarkable," Blake commented, watching Riley across the room. The man followed his gaze. "Indeed, one of the most talented curators I've ever worked with. Her dedication to democratizing art education is revolutionary, though it's cost her professionally at times." "How so?" The museum world can be as elitist as any industry. Riley's insistence on allocating significant resources to programs for underprivileged schools hasn't always endeared her to board members who prefer splashy acquisitions and galas that attract wealthy donors. He gave Blake a knowing look. It's refreshing to see someone of your influence taking an interest in her work rather than just her company. The comment, delivered without judgment, nonetheless struck Blake uncomfortably. Was his interest in Riley so transparent? And was it really different from his previous relationships? Or was he simply employing more subtle tactics to achieve the same goal? At the end of the evening, Blake offered Riley a ride home. "Thank you, but I need to stay until everything's wrapped up," she said. "Part of the job." "Then I'll wait." She tilted her head, studying him. "That's not necessary." "I know. I want to." For nearly an hour, Blake sat in a quiet corner of the now empty exhibition space, answering emails on his phone while Riley coordinated with staff. When she finally approached, her professional demeanor had softened, replaced by visible fatigue. "You actually waited," she said, surprise evident in her voice. "I said I would." Blake stood, offering his arm. "Now will you let me take you home?" One in. The back of his car, Riley leaned her head against the leather seat and closed her eyes briefly. "Thank you for coming tonight. You were," she searched for the word, unexpectedly appropriate. Blake laughed. "High praise indeed. I told you I could be the perfect professional companion." "You did," she acknowledged with a small smile, "though I noticed at least 3 board members trying to corner you about potential donations. 4, actually. I deflected politely, as instructed. This was your night." Riley turned to look at him, her expression curious. "You're different when you're not trying so hard to impress, you know. More authentic." The observation hit closer to home than she could know. In the wake of Carter's revelation about potential corporate espionage, Blake had spent the day questioning whether anyone in his life saw him as more than a means to an end. "I've been thinking about what you said," he admitted, "about wanting something real. The truth is, I'm not sure I would recognize real if I found it. My world doesn't leave much room for authenticity." "Everyone's world has room for authenticity," Riley said softly. "It's just a question of what you're willing to risk to make space for it." They had arrived at her brownstone. Blake walked her to the door, the night air cool around them. "Would you have dinner with me again?" he asked. "Not as a professional companion, not as a conquest, just dinner." Riley's dark eyes searched his face. "Why is this so important to you, Blake? Really?" It was the same direct question she'd asked at Elysium, but this time Blake found himself answering with unplanned honesty. "Because when I'm with you, I glimpse a version of myself I'd forgotten existed, someone who cares about more than winning, someone who might actually be worthy of a woman like you." He stepped closer. "And because I haven't stopped thinking about you since the moment we met." The admission hung between them, more naked and vulnerable than Blake had intended. Riley's expression softened, a mixture of wariness and something warmer. "Sunday," she said finally. "I'm busy until then." "Sunday," Blake agreed, relief washing over him. "I'll pick you up at 7. He wanted to kiss her, realized with some surprise just how much he wanted to, but something held him back. This fragile connection between them felt too important to rush. Instead, he took her hand and pressed it gently between both of his. "Good night, Riley." As his car pulled away from the curb, Blake's phone chimed with an incoming message. "Carter Harrington. Need to meet first. Thing tomorrow. New developments in the investigation. It's not good." Blake stared at the message, the warm afterglow of the evening fading. Tomorrow he would deal with whoever was sabotaging his company. Tonight, he allowed himself to focus on the unexpected pleasure of an evening spent in the company of a woman who saw through his carefully constructed facade and somehow didn't turn away. "This can't be right," Blake said, his voice dangerously quiet as he stared at the report Carter had placed on his desk. "Check it again." "We've verified it 3 times," Carter replied, his expression grim. "The information trail leads directly back to Metropolitan Museum acquisitions, specifically art purchases made through Riley Thompson's department over the past 8 months. Blake stood abruptly, turning to face the Manhattan skyline. His mind raced, refusing to accept the implications. There must be another explanation. "Riley wouldn't—" "Blake," Carter interrupted gently, "I know you've been seeing her, but the evidence is compelling. The museum's tech modernization project, the one you suddenly funded for $4 million, shares board members with 3 companies that have been acquiring significant positions in your competitors. Jordan Wyndham's wife sits on that same board." Blake's jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean Riley is involved." "No," Carter agreed. "But these financial connections, combined with the timing of your relationship, it's concerning. Someone who knew about our acquisition strategy has been feeding information to Wyndham Tech. The correlation between your meetings with Ms. Thompson and the subsequent leaks is hard to ignore." Blake refused to believe it. The woman who had challenged him to be authentic, who had seen through his carefully constructed facade, could she really be using him? "What exactly are you suggesting, Carter?" His friend sighed. "Best case scenario, she's an unwitting conduit. Information you share with her somehow makes its way to people who use it against us. Worst case—" He let the implication hang in the air. "Get out," Blake said quietly. "Blake." "I said get out." He rarely raised his voice, and the sharp command made Carter flinch. "I'll handle this myself." After Carter left, Blake sank into his chair, the report open before him. Cold, hard data pointing toward a conclusion he couldn't accept. His phone showed a calendar reminder: dinner with Riley in 6 hours. He should cancel. Distance himself. Until he knew the truth, it was the prudent business decision. Instead, he picked up his phone and dialed a different number. "Rebecca, I need you to clear my schedule for the afternoon and contact Elliot Davidson at Davidson Private Investigations. Tell him I need his best team immediately." Riley Thompson stood in the museum's storage facility, cataloging recent acquisitions, when her colleague Michael appeared at the door. "Riley, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." He lowered his voice. "It's Jordan Wyndham's wife." Riley frowned. Cecilia Wyndham was a major donor but rarely visited the museum offices. "I'll be right there." In her office, Cecilia Wyndham sat poised and elegant, a designer handbag resting on her lap. "Riley, darling, thank you for seeing me without an appointment." "Of course, Mrs. Wyndham. What can I do?" "For you?" Cecilia smiled, a practiced expression that didn't reach her eyes. "I wanted to discuss the upcoming charity auction. Jordan and I are considering a significant donation. But first," she leaned forward, "I understand you've been seeing Blake Sterling." Riley stiffened. "My personal life isn't relevant to museum business, Mrs. Wyndham." "Oh, but it could be." Cecilia's smile turned predatory. "Sterling Enterprises is making moves that directly threaten my husband's company. Any insight you could provide would be generously rewarded, both personally and for your beloved education program." The implication was clear. Riley felt a cold rage building inside her. "Are you asking me to spy on Blake Sterling?" Cecilia waved a manicured hand dismissively. "Such an ugly word. I'm simply suggesting a mutually beneficial arrangement. Information flows in all directions in our circles, Riley. You've been on the outside looking in for too long. This is your chance to secure your future and the future of your projects. By betraying someone's trust. By being practical. Men like Blake Sterling and my husband understand the rules of the game. They do the same without hesitation." Cecilia stood, placing a business card on Riley's desk. "Think about it. My private number is on the back. Call me after your next dinner." After she left, Riley sat motionless, the card untouched on her desk. Was this why Blake had pursued her so persistently? Did he suspect her department's connection to the Wyndhams? Was he using her to gather information the same way Cecilia wanted her to use him? The thought sent a wave of nausea through her. She had begun to believe there might be something genuine developing between them. Now she wondered if she'd been naive all along. Riley picked up her phone, finger hovering over Blake's contact. She should cancel dinner, step back until she understood what was happening. Instead, she put the phone down. If Blake Sterling was using her, she deserved to know the truth. And she would discover it tonight. The small French bistro in the West Village was nearly empty at the unfashionable hour of 6, exactly as Blake had requested when he changed their reservation. He sat at a corner table, a bottle of wine, already open, his expression unreadable as Riley approached. "You're early," she said, taking the seat across from him. "I wanted to ensure privacy." Blake studied her face carefully. "You look beautiful." "Thank you." Riley placed her napkin in her lap, her movements deliberate. "Though I'm surprised you still wanted to have dinner. I had the distinct impression your interest was waning." Blake poured her wine, his blue eyes never leaving hers. "What gave you that impression?" "Women's intuition," she replied lightly, though her heart was pounding. "You've been distant since the museum event." "I've been preoccupied," he admitted. "Business complications." Riley took a sip of wine, gathering her courage. "Anything I can help with?" Blake's expression hardened almost imperceptibly. "Interesting. That you'd offer. As it happens, my company has experienced some unusual information leaks recently, confidential acquisition plans finding their way to competitors, specifically to Jordan Wyndham." Riley's hand tightened around her wine glass. "That sounds serious." "It is," Blake leaned forward. "Especially since one of the few common factors in the timeline of these leaks is my association with you." The accusation hung in the air between them. Riley set down her glass carefully. "I see. So this dinner is what? An interrogation? A sting operation to catch the corporate spy? Is that what you are, Riley?" His voice was low, controlled, but she could hear the hurt beneath the anger. "Have you been using me to gather information for Wyndham Tech?" "No," she said firmly, "but it's interesting that your mind went there so quickly. Projection, perhaps. After all, you only pursued me after I rejected you, and you only funded my project after manipulating the situation to force me to see you again." Blake's jaw tightened. "I pursued you because you fascinated me. I funded your project because I believed in it. And in you." "Really? Then why did Cecilia Wyndham visit my office today to ask me to spy on you?" Riley leaned forward. "She seemed quite confident that men like you understand the rules of the game. Her words, not mine." Confusion flashed across Blake's face. "Cecilia Wyndham approached you today. She offered to secure my professional future if I'd share information about Sterling Enterprises." Riley's voice was steady despite her inner turmoil. "Apparently everyone assumes our relationship is transactional in some way. The only question is who's using whom." Blake was silent for a long moment, his expression shifting from anger to something more complex. "Did you agree to her proposal?" "Of course not," Riley snapped. "Unlike some people, I don't manipulate others for personal gain." "Touché," Blake said softly. He reached into his jacket, pulling out a small file and placing it on the table. "My investigation team prepared this report. It details financial connections between the Metropolitan Museum's Technology Board, Jordan Wyndham's wife, and 3 shell companies that have been acting against Sterling Enterprises' interests." Riley opened the file, skimming its contents with growing horror. "I had no idea," she said finally. "The Technology Board operates independently from my department. I'm not privy to their investment decisions." "I know," Blake said, surprising her. "The report also makes clear that you personally have no connection to any of these entities. But someone is using the museum's initiatives as cover for corporate espionage. When Cecilia approached you today, she confirmed my suspicions. The Wyndhams are behind this." Riley closed the file, suddenly exhausted. "So you didn't suspect me?" "I did," Blake admitted, "for about 6 agonizing hours. Then I remembered something important about you." "What's that?" "You're the most genuinely honest person I've ever met." His expression softened. "You wouldn't know how to be duplicitous if your life depended on it. It's what drew me to you in the first place." Relief washed through Riley, followed immediately by lingering doubt. "If you believed in my innocence, why this elaborate setup? The early reservation, the confrontation?" Because I needed to see your reaction, Blake said. Not because I doubted you, but because I needed confirmation that you weren't being used unwittingly. He reached across the table, his hand covering hers. And because I owed you the truth about the investigation before asking you a very important question. Riley tensed. What question? Do you have any real feelings for me, or has this all been an obligation you felt because of the museum funding? The vulnerability in his question caught her off guard. This powerful man, who controlled a corporate empire with ruthless efficiency, was looking at her with uncertainty in his eyes. It wasn't obligation, she said softly. It was caution. Fear that opening myself up to you would end exactly like this, with suspicion and accusations. And now? Riley withdrew her hand from his. Now I don't know what to think. You funded my project, then used that connection to investigate me and my colleagues. You claimed to want something real, but your instinct was still to control the situation, to withhold information until it served your purpose. Blake's expression tightened. I was protecting my company. You were protecting yourself, Riley countered, from the vulnerability of trusting someone completely. And you're different, Blake challenged. You came here tonight suspecting I might be using you, yet you said nothing. You were gathering information too, Riley. We're not so different. The truth of his words stung. Riley stood, gathering her purse. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we're both too damaged to build something real. Blake rose quickly. Riley, wait. I need time to think, she said, about what I want, about whether what's between us is worth the risk. What is between us? Blake asked, his voice unusually hesitant. Riley met his eyes directly. Something I haven't felt in a very long time, something that terrifies me precisely because it could be real. She stepped back. But I won't be another acquisition for you, Blake. I won't be controlled or managed or investigated when you feel insecure. And I can't be with someone who runs at the first sign of conflict, he responded, his voice low with intensity. Relationships, real ones, require working through misunderstandings, not walking away from them. They stood facing each other, the small restaurant forgotten around them, both stubborn and hurt and unwilling to concede. I'm not walking away, Riley said finally. I'm asking for space to think clearly, without your overwhelming presence clouding my judgment. Blake's jaw worked as he visibly struggled with her request. Control versus surrender, the battle played out across his features. Finally, he nodded, once sharply. Take whatever time you need, he said, but know this, what I feel for you is real, Riley. Perhaps the only real thing in my life right now. And I'm not giving up on it, on us, without a fight. The raw emotion in his declaration nearly broke her resolve. Riley hesitated, then leaned forward and pressed a soft, brief kiss to his cheek. Goodbye, Blake, she whispered, then turned and walked away, tears threatening to fall only after she had safely exited the restaurant. Blake stood motionless long after she'd gone, the untouched dinner growing cold, his mind replaying every moment of their conversation. For the first time in 15 years, Blake Sterling had no strategy, no clear path forward. He had laid his heart bare, and now all he could do was wait, and hope that Riley Thompson would choose to see the man behind the power, the vulnerability, behind the control. And for the first time, the possibility of losing filled him with genuine fear. 1 week had passed since Riley walked out of the bistro. 1 week of silence that felt to Blake like a physical weight pressing against his chest. He had honored her request for space, though every instinct screamed at him to act, to fix, to control the situation as he would any business challenge. The corporate espionage investigation had progressed without her involvement. The evidence led directly to a board member at the museum who had connections to the Wyndhams, exactly as Blake had suspected. The legal team was building a case, and Sterling Enterprises would emerge stronger than before. Yet Blake felt hollow. His penthouse, with its spectacular views and museum-quality art, seemed empty and meaningless. He moved through his days with mechanical efficiency, his mind constantly returning to Riley's parting words. Something I haven't felt in a very long time, something that terrifies me precisely because it could be real. On Friday morning, Blake stared at his untouched, Coffee, Carter's concerned voice barely registering. Blake, did you hear what I said? The board is questioning your focus. The Meridian counteroffer needs your attention. Blake looked up. Cancel it. Carter blinked. Cancel what? The meeting? The Meridian acquisition. Let Wyndham have it. Have you lost your mind? We've been pursuing Meridian for months. Their neural network technology is crucial to our AI development plans. Blake stood, his decision crystallizing with sudden clarity. There are other ways to develop that technology. Ways that won't involve a prolonged corporate battle with Wyndham. This isn't like you, Carter said, studying his friend with growing concern. Is this about Riley Thompson? No, Blake said, then reconsidered. Yes, it's about priorities, about recognizing what matters. Carter's expression softened. Blake, I've known you for 20 years. I've never seen you like this over a woman. It's not just about Riley, Blake said, though her absence was a constant ache. It's about the man I've become, the man who would investigate someone he cares about rather than simply asking for the truth, the man so accustomed to control that he's forgotten how to trust. You built an empire by being cautious, by maintaining control, Carter reminded him. And I may have lost something invaluable by applying those same principles to my personal life. Blake straightened his tie. The board meeting is in an hour. After that, I'll be unreachable for the rest of the day. Where are you going? Blake picked up his phone, his decision made. To try something new, vulnerability. Riley sat in her office, staring at the museum's latest acquisition reports, without seeing them. A week had passed since her confrontation with Blake, a week of questioning her judgment, her feelings, her stubborn pride. Her colleague Michael knocked on the open door. Package for you. Courier just delivered it. Riley accepted the small, elegant box with a mixture of curiosity and trepidation. No card, no note. Inside, nestled in tissue paper, lay a simple silver key. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The key opens something important to me, something I've never shared with anyone. 340 Central Park West, Penthouse B, 7 p.m. tonight. Only if you want to. Blake. Riley stared at the message, the key cool against her palm. Not a demand, not a manipulation, an invitation, a choice. She slipped the key into her purse, her decision not yet made. At 7:15 p.m., Riley stood outside the address Blake had sent, not his residence but a pre-war building overlooking Central Park. She had almost not come, had changed her mind a dozen times throughout the day. Yet here she was, the silver key in her hand, her heart pounding with uncertainty. The doorman nodded politely, clearly expecting her. The private elevator required the key to access the penthouse level. When the doors opened, Riley found herself not in a luxurious apartment, but in a space that took her breath away for entirely different reasons. The penthouse had been converted into a private gallery, walls lined with paintings, sculptures positioned thoughtfully throughout the open space, soft lighting illuminating each piece perfectly. Blake stood in the center of the room, hands in his pockets, more casually, dressed than she had ever seen him in jeans and a simple button-down shirt. His expression as he watched her step into the space was a mixture of hope and vulnerability that made her heart constrict. "You came," he said simply. "What is this place?" Riley asked, moving slowly into the gallery, drawn to a small Monet landscape on the nearest wall. "My sanctuary," Blake answered, remaining where he was, giving her space to explore. "I bought this building 15 years ago when Sterling Enterprises took off. Everyone expected me to create some bachelor palace. Instead, I built this." Riley moved from piece to piece, her curator's eye recognizing the extraordinary collection. Not the ostentatious selections of someone buying art as status symbols, but the carefully curated choices of a genuine lover of art. Impressionist landscapes, abstract expressionist works, contemporary sculptures, each piece selected with obvious, personal connection rather than investment potential. "These aren't for show," she said, understanding dawning. "How you've never displayed these publicly?" "No," Blake confirmed, finally moving toward her. "My public collection at the main penthouse was chosen by consultants. Impressive names to impress important people. These, his voice softened, these are just for me. Pieces that moved me, that spoke to something I often pretend doesn't exist. Your sensitivity, Riley said, stopping before a small Edward Hopper painting of a solitary figure gazing out a window. Your humanity. Yes. He stood beside her now, close but not touching. After our last conversation, I realized something. I've spent my entire adult life dividing myself into two people, the ruthless businessman everyone expects, and the private person who finds solace in beauty, in art, in genuine connection. I've kept those worlds completely separate, believing that vulnerability would undermine my success. Riley turned to face him. And now? Now I understand that compartmentalizing my life has cost me the possibility of something real. Blake's blue eyes held hers steadily. I've never brought anyone here, Riley. Not business associates, not friends, certainly not women I've dated. This place, these works, they're the closest thing to my true self that exists in the world. The significance of his gesture wasn't lost on Riley. This wasn't a grand romantic overture designed to impress. This was Blake Sterling laying bare a part of himself he had protected fiercely for years. Why show me now? She asked softly. Because you were right about me, he admitted. I've been afraid to trust, to relinquish control, to be seen as I really am. And in doing so, I nearly lost the one person who made me want to be whole again. Riley's chest tightened with emotion. I was afraid too, she confessed. Afraid that what I was feeling was just an illusion, that you were too damaged by power and control to ever truly connect. I'm still learning, Blake said, the humility in his voice unlike anything she'd heard from him before. Still fighting instincts developed over decades. But I want to try, Riley. Not because you're a challenge, to be conquered, but because when I'm with you, I remember the man I wanted to be before success redefined me. Riley moved to the center of the gallery, turning slowly to take in the collection that represented Blake's hidden depths. It's extraordinary, she said. Not just the art, but what it represents, the soul you've kept hidden from the world. Blake approached her cautiously. I've been thinking about what you said, about not being another acquisition. You were right. I've treated relationships as transactions for so long that I barely remembered how to simply connect with another person. He reached for her hand tentatively. I don't want to control you, Riley. I want to know you. I want you to know me, all of me, not just the carefully constructed facade. Riley looked down at their joined hands, then back up to his face. The mask of confidence and control had fallen away, revealing a man both powerful and uncertain, strong and vulnerable. I've spent the past week thinking about us, she said quietly. About whether what's between us is worth the risk. Blake's hand tightened slightly around hers. And I realized that the very things that frightened me about you, your intensity, your drive, your desire for control, are mirror images of my own fears. I've been hiding too, Blake, behind my principles, behind my independence, keeping people at a distance to avoid being hurt again. She moved closer to him, close enough to catch the subtle scent of his cologne, to see the hope kindling in his eyes. We're both afraid of the same thing, she continued, of being truly seen, of being vulnerable, of giving someone else the power to hurt us. I would never hurt you, Blake said fervently. Riley smiled gently. You can't promise that. No one can. Real relationships involve risk. They involve pain sometimes. The question isn't whether we'll hurt each other. It's whether what we might build together is worth that risk. Blake raised a hand to her cheek, his touch feather-light. And is it? Worth the risk? Riley leaned into his touch, her decision made. I think it could be. If we both commit to being authentic with each other, if we both agree that this isn't about conquest or control, but about partnership, about seeing each other clearly and choosing each other anyway. I can do that, Blake said, his voice low and intense. I want to do that, Riley, with you. The last barriers between them seemed to dissolve as Riley stepped fully into his embrace. When their lips finally met, It wasn't with the desperate passion of conquest, but with the gentle certainty of coming home. Blake's arms encircled her, strong yet yielding, as though she were something precious he feared might break. When they parted, Riley rested her forehead against his. "This won't be easy, you know. We're both stubborn, both used to independence." Blake smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his face. "I've never been interested in easy, Riley. I'm interested in worthwhile." He led her to a small sitting area near the windows overlooking Central Park, now glittering with evening lights. They talked for hours, about art, about their childhoods, about their fears and hopes. Blake spoke of his estranged father, of the drive that had pushed him to build his empire, of the emptiness he sometimes felt at the peak of his success. Riley shared her broken engagement, her passion for democratizing art education, her struggle to balance professional ambition with personal vulnerability. As midnight approached, they stood at the window, Blake's arms wrapped around Riley from behind, her head resting against his chest. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "Now," Blake said, pressing a gentle kiss to her temple, "we build something real, together, day by day." He turned her in his arms, his expression more open than she had ever seen it. "I can't promise I won't slip back into old patterns sometimes. I can't promise I won't struggle with control, or that my protective instincts won't flare up. But I can promise to try, to be honest with you, to trust you, to see you for who you truly are, and to let you see me, all of me." Riley reached up, her hand against his cheek. "And I promise to be patient when those old patterns emerge, to remind you that vulnerability isn't weakness, to be honest about my own fears and doubts, to build a relationship based on mutual respect and understanding, not power or possession." "That sounds suspiciously like a future," Blake said, a smile playing at his lips. "It sounds like a beginning," Riley corrected. "The rest we'll figure out together." Their lips met again, sealing promises made not through grand gestures or passionate declarations, but through the quiet understanding of two people who had finally found in each other something both had feared might not exist. A connection authentic enough to be worth the risk of pain, strong enough to withstand the weight of their pasts, and real enough to transform them both. In the private gallery that housed Blake's hidden soul, surrounded by beauty he had collected but never shared, Blake Sterling finally understood what it meant to truly possess something valuable, not through control or conquest, but through the willing gift of trust and vulnerability, freely given and gratefully received. And as Riley Thompson melted into his embrace, she realized that true strength lay not in rigid independence, but in the courage to open oneself to possibility, to risk, to love. The walls they had both built over years of protecting themselves hadn't been fortresses of strength but prisons of isolation. In each other's arms, those walls began to crumble, making space for something neither had dared to hope for. Something real. The end. Dear listeners, we hope Blake and Riley's journey from control to vulnerability has moved you as deeply as it has moved us. Their story reminds us that true connection requires courage, the courage to be seen as we truly are, to risk pain for the possibility of something authentic and transformative. If you've enjoyed this exploration of power, vulnerability, and genuine connection, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and like this video. Every day we bring you unique stories that delve into the complexities of human relationships and the courage it takes to build something real in a world of superficial connections. What would you risk for the chance at authentic love? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.